If you are reading this, then I have either perished or been rescued from this white hell. I write now, not for glory, but so that others may know what transpired aboard the Resolute, and how we endured what no men should have to endure. Let this stand as testament to human will, and as warning to those who would challenge the Arctic without proper humility. The morning of August 3rd, 1850, dawned clear and deceptively calm over Baffin Bay. Major Wilhelm Pius stood on the deck of the Resolute, a refitted merchant vessel now pressed into service for Arctic exploration, and watched the ice floes drift past like massive white islands in a dark sea. At 42 years old, Pius was a decorated officer of the Prussian Navy, a veteran of the Baltic campaigns, and a man who prided himself on preparation and discipline. He had spent 2 years planning this expedition to map the uncharted passages north of the Canadian Arctic. Beautiful, isn't it, Major? First Officer Henrik Volker joined him at the rail, his breath condensing in the frigid air despite the August date. Like nature's cathedrals. Beautiful and deadly, Pius replied, his weathered face betraying no emotion. Beauty in the Arctic is always a mask for danger. The Resolute carried a crew of 23 men, sailors, scientists, a physician, and a chaplain. They had departed from Bremen 4 months earlier, stopping in Greenland to take on additional supplies, and 2 Inuit guides, Arnaluk and his teenage son Tulugek. The elder guide had warned them that the ice was behaving strangely this season, closing earlier than usual. But Pius had been confident. They had enough provisions for 18 months, reinforced hulls, and the latest navigational equipment. What they did not have was humility. By midday, the ship had penetrated deeper into Lancaster Sound than any Prussian vessel before. The crew was jubilant, already imagining the honors that would await them upon their return. Dr. Friedrich Hartmann, the expedition's naturalist, sketched frantically in his journal, documenting new ice formations and recorded temperature readings. Chaplain Peter Dietrich led the men in a hymn of thanksgiving. Arnaluk did not sing. The old Inuit stood at the bow, studying the ice with worried eyes. When Pius approached him, the guide spoke in halting German. "Ice speaks. It tells me, closing soon." "We have weeks yet before winter sets in properly," Pius assured him. "The charts indicate this passage remains navigable until late September." "Charts made by men who live," Arnaluk said simply. "Ice does not read charts." That night, the temperature plummeted 15 degrees. By dawn on August 4th, the ice had closed around them like a fist. The grinding began at 3 in the morning. Pius bolted awake in his cabin as the entire ship shuddered and groaned, the sound of ice crushing against the hull like the howl of some ancient beast. He threw on his coat and raced to the deck, where he found the watch crew staring in horror at the scene around them. The open water they had navigated the previous day had vanished. In every direction, as far as the eye could see in the pale Arctic twilight, stretched an unbroken field of ice. The Resolute sat trapped in a frozen embrace, the ice at least 3 feet thick in all directions. "Impossible," Volker whispered. "This should take weeks." "The ice does not care what should happen," Arnaluk said quietly. He had appeared on deck without a sound. "Now we wait for spring. Maybe then it releases us." "Spring," Dr. Hartmann sputtered. "That's 9 months away." "Or we die," Arnaluk added, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had seen death walk the ice many times before. Pius called an immediate meeting in the wardroom. By candlelight, he spread out their charts and took inventory of their situation. They had food stores sufficient for 18 months, if rationed carefully. Salted meat, hardtack, dried beans, flour, sugar, tea, and several barrels of sauerkraut, meant to prevent scurvy. They had coal for heating, though it would need to be conserved. They had wool clothing, though not designed for an Arctic winter. They had weapons, though ammunition was limited. What they didn't have was any way to free the ship. "We attempt to cut through," Pius announced. "All able-bodied men will take shifts with saws and picks. We'll create a channel toward open water." For 3 days, the crew labored in brutal cold, sawing at ice that seemed to regenerate as fast as they could cut it. Their hands blistered and froze inside their gloves. The ice laughed at their efforts, cracking and shifting, sometimes closing gaps they had worked hours to open. On the 3rd day, young sailor Thomas Becker collapsed with frostbite on his hands and feet. Dr. Hartmann amputated 3 fingers in the ship's surgery while the man screamed. After a week, Pius called off the cutting. They had managed to move the ship barely 50 yards, and the ice around them now stretched for miles. He gathered the men on deck and delivered the truth with military precision. "Gentlemen, we are trapped until spring, perhaps longer. We will survive this through discipline, rationing, and faith. Every man will have duties. Every man will follow orders. We are still a Prussian crew, and we will conduct ourselves accordingly." That night, Pius wrote in his journal, "We are ghosts now, living in a ship that has become our tomb. But we are not dead yet. I will get these men home, or I will die trying." September brought darkness and cold that made August seem like summer. The sun dipped lower each day until it barely crested the horizon at noon, painting the ice in shades of deep blue and purple. The temperature dropped to 30, then 40, then 50 degrees below freezing. Pius established a strict routine. The crew woke at 7, attended chapel services with Dietrich, ate a measured breakfast of porridge and tea, then divided into work parties. Some maintained the ship, chipping ice off the rigging and checking the hull for pressure damage. Others hunted seals and the occasional polar bear that wandered near, desperate to supplement their dwindling supplies. A third group, led by Dr. Hartmann, conducted scientific observations, though these grew more perfunctory as the cold made holding instruments nearly impossible. Arnaluk and Tulugak became invaluable. The elder Inuit taught the crew how to build snow houses, igloos, near the ship for additional shelter and ice fishing. Tulugak, only 16 but already a skilled hunter, showed them how to set seal holes and read the ice for danger. Under their tutelage, the European crew slowly began to learn the Arctic's harsh lessons. But the cold was an education delivered in pain. By October, 4 more men had severe frostbite. Becker, the young sailor who had lost fingers, developed an infection that Dr. Hartmann could not stop. He died on October 23rd, delirious with fever, calling for his mother. They buried him on the ice, though the ground was too frozen to dig. They piled rocks over his body, and Chaplain Dietrich spoke words that were snatched away by the howling wind. "The first of many," Volker asked Pius privately that night. "The first and the last," Pius said firmly. "We will lose no one else." It was a promise he could not keep. November brought the polar night. The sun disappeared entirely. leaving them in a darkness broken only by stars, the occasional shimmer of aurora borealis, and their carefully rationed candles and oil lamps. The darkness was oppressive, weighing on men's minds worse than the cold. Arguments broke out over trivial matters. Men grew sullen and withdrawn. 3 sailors, Hans Möller, Josef Klein, and Otto Werner, were caught stealing extra rations from the stores. Pius had them flogged in front of the crew, 3 lashes each, then confined to the coldest part of the ship for 2 days. The punishment was harsh but necessary. Survival depended on the law being maintained. "You think me cruel," Pius said to Dietrich after the chaplain questioned the severity, "but I am preventing chaos. Once discipline fails, we all die." Yet for all his military bearing, Pius felt the darkness gnawing at him too. He dreamed of his wife, Margaret, and his 2 daughters back in Prussia. Would he ever see them again? Would they even learn of his fate? Or would the Resolute simply vanish into Arctic legend, another ship lost to the ice? Christmas arrived with a temperature of 58 degrees below zero. They held a service in the main cabin, singing carols with voices made rough by cold. Cook Albrecht Hoffmann managed to prepare a feast from their stores. Roasted seal, hardtack, soaked in seal fat to make it palatable, and precious sugar distributed to each man. For a few hours, they were not trapped souls, but human beings sharing fellowship. Arnaluk told stories of his people's survival through countless winters. "Ice is not enemy," he said in his broken German. "Ice is teacher, teaches patience, teaches respect, teaches that man is small and world is large." By January 1851, they had been trapped for 5 months. The ship groaned constantly under the pressure of the ice, beams cracking like rifle shots. They had gone through 1/3 of their coal supply and had to limit heating to 4 hours per day. Men slept in their coats, clustered together for warmth. Frostbite was constant. Everyone had lost weight. Several men showed signs of scurvy despite the sauerkraut rations. Then, on January 18th, disaster struck. It started in the galley. Cook Hoffmann, half blind from malnutrition and the darkness, knocked over an oil lamp while preparing the evening meal. The flame caught on dried seal skins stored nearby, and within seconds, fire was racing across the galley ceiling. "Fire!" the cry went up, the most feared word aboard any wooden ship. Men scrambled in the darkness, disoriented and panicked. In the Arctic, fire meant salvation and death simultaneously, warmth that could consume them. Pius organized bucket lines, but the water barrels were frozen solid. They threw snow onto the flames, which only made the oily fire spread faster. For 20 desperate minutes, the crew fought the inferno. Finally, they broke through the deck above the galley and opened it to the Arctic air. The cold rushed in like a living thing, and slowly, agonizingly, the fire died. But the damage was catastrophic. The galley was destroyed. Most of their remaining coal had been stored near the galley and was now unusable, contaminated with toxic smoke, and melted into useless chunks. Worse, the fire had consumed approximately 1/4 of their food stores, flour, dried fish, and several barrels of salted meat. Cook Hoffmann survived with severe burns on his hands and face. Dr. Hartmann did what he could, but in the cold, wounds healed slowly, if at all. Pius recalculated their supplies with Volker. The numbers were grim. "If we reduce rations further, we can make it to August," Volker said, "but barely, and that's assuming the ice releases us by then. And if it doesn't, Volker didn't answer. That night, Pius gathered the men. He stood before them, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken, but his voice was steady. We have suffered a setback. Our supplies are reduced. Starting tomorrow, rations will be cut by a third. It will be difficult. Many of you will feel hunger, such as you have never known. But we will survive because we must, because I will accept nothing less. We are Prussians. We do not surrender. We do not die in the ice like dogs. We endure. But even as he spoke, Pius saw the despair in their eyes. They were beginning to lose hope. February was the nadir. The cold was beyond anything the Europeans had imagined possible, hovering between 60 and 70 degrees below zero. Men's breath froze instantly into ice, crystals. To touch metal with bare skin meant leaving flesh behind. The darkness was absolute, unending, crushing, and the hunger began. Even Arnaluk, who had endured many winters, looked worried. This cold, very bad, he told Pius. Worst in my life. Something wrong with world. With reduced rations, the men weakened rapidly. Scurvy returned with a vengeance, despite Dr. Hartmann's best efforts. Gums bled, teeth loosened, old wounds reopened. Engineer Karl Zimmermann developed a persistent cough that sounded like tearing canvas. Navigator Anton Brecht could no longer work his instruments. His hands shook too badly from malnutrition. Then the madness came. It started with Sailor Müller, one of the men who had been caught stealing rations. He began talking to people who weren't there, having full conversations with empty air. Dr. Hartmann diagnosed him with Arctic hysteria, brought on by darkness, cold, and malnutrition. There was no treatment except to restrain him when he grew violent. Others followed. Young sailor Dieter Schultz became convinced that something was living in the ice beneath the ship, something that whispered to him at night. He tried to drill through the deck to let it in. They stopped him before he could breach the hull. Chaplain Dietrich held prayer services, but even he was flagging. His sermons became rambling affairs about sin and punishment, about God testing them in the furnace of ice. Some men found comfort in his words, others stopped attending. Pius himself felt the darkness pressing in. He had always been a rational man, a man of logic and discipline. But in the endless night, he began to understand how madness took hold. Sometimes he would forget where he was, convinced he was back in his home in Bremen, reaching for his wife in bed, only to find his hand grasping frozen air. He kept writing in his journal, though his entries grew shorter, more desperate. March 2nd, lost sailor Werner last night. Went onto the ice for his watch and did not return. Found him this morning 200 yards from ship, frozen solid, sitting as if resting. Face was peaceful. Perhaps he simply decided to sleep. I envy him the peace. March 15th, Dr. Hartmann says the scurvy is advanced in 6 men. We have no more sauerkraut. He tries making teas from what plant matter we can find, but there is nothing. Nothing but ice. March 23rd. I can no longer feel my feet. None of us can. We stumble through our routines like walking corpses. Volker asked me today if we are dead already, if this is hell. I had no answer for him, but even in the depths of that terrible winter, something kept Pius going. Perhaps it was his military training, the discipline beaten into him over 20 years of service. Perhaps it was stubbornness, or perhaps it was the memory of his daughters' faces, the promise he had made to Margaret that he would return. Whatever it was, he clung to it like a lifeline. April brought the first hints of change. The sun returned, just a sliver on the horizon at first, but growing day by day. The temperature rose, still below zero, but rising. Men wept at the sight of the sun. Even Muller, in his madness, became calmer. But they had paid a terrible price for winter. Of the original 23 souls, 16 remained. 7 men lay buried on the ice. Thomas Becker, Otto Werner, Engineer Zimmermann, Navigator Brecht, 2 sailors named Meyer and Hoffmann, and Cook Albrecht, who had succumbed to his burns. The survivors were skeletal, many unable to walk without assistance. Dr. Hartmann examined each man and delivered his report to Pius privately. Major, in my medical opinion, several men will not survive even if we are rescued today. Their bodies are too damaged. Sailor Klein has advanced scurvy. I believe his organs are failing. Muller's madness is permanent, and you... He paused. Speak plainly, doctor. You need to rest. You are driving yourself to death. I see how you give your rations to others, how you take the longest watches. You are no good to us as a corpse. I will rest when we are home, Pius replied. By May, the ice began to crack. Not to release them, but to shift and groan, massive pressure ridges forming and collapsing around the ship. The Resolute was lifted several feet by the moving ice, then dropped, her hull screaming in protest. They waited for her to break apart, but the reinforced timbers held. Arnaluk and Tulugak began to range farther from the ship, hunting birds that were returning with the spring. They brought back eggs, seal, even a small caribou that had somehow wandered onto the ice. The fresh meat was distributed with religious care, each man receiving precisely equal portions. For the first time in months, Pius saw color return to his men's cheeks, but still the ice did not release them. June arrived, then July. The ice remained solid, though now shot through with leads of open water that came and went unpredictably. They tried again to cut through, but the ice was as thick as ever, and the men were too weak for sustained labor. Sailor Klein died on July 4th, simply failing to wake one morning. Dr. Hartmann said his heart had given out. They buried him beside the others. We've been here 11 months, Volker said to Pius as they stood over the grave. We're going to die here, aren't we? No, Pius said simply. We are not. But privately, in his journal, he wrote, I do not know how much longer we can endure. The men are at their limit. I am at mine. I pray for deliverance, but the ice is indifferent to prayer. August 12th, 1851, exactly 1 year after they had become trapped. Pius was on deck, as he was every morning now, scanning the ice for any sign of change. The sun was warm on his face, a sensation he had nearly forgotten. Around the Resolute, pools of meltwater had formed on the ice surface, reflecting the sky like scattered mirrors. Then he heard it, a sound like distant thunder, rolling across the ice field. All hands on deck, he shouted. The crew stumbled up from below, those who could still walk helping those who couldn't. They stood at the rails and watched as before their eyes a crack appeared in the ice a mile to the north. The crack widened, became a lead of dark water, then a channel. It's breaking, Dr. Hartmann whispered. God in heaven, it's breaking. For the next 3 days, the ice broke up around them in slow motion. Massive floes crashed into each other, grinding and splitting. The Resolute shuddered and creaked, but held together. The men barely slept. watching the spectacle with the intensity of prisoners watching their cell door open. On August 15th, the ice around the ship finally cracked. Not enough to free them, but enough to allow movement. Pius ordered all remaining able men to the ice with saws and poles. They worked with the last of their strength, widening the cracks, pushing away floes. On August 17th, at 2 in the afternoon, the Resolute floated free. The men who could stand cheered. Some wept. Muller, in his madness, fell to his knees and prayed incoherently. Pius stood at the helm, his hands on the wheel, and felt something he thought he had lost: hope. But they were not saved yet. The Resolute was barely seaworthy. Her hull had been crushed in several places and leaked constantly. The remaining crew manned pumps in shifts, fighting to keep her afloat. They had almost no coal, relying on wind and a makeshift sail rigged from canvas and sealskins. They had food for perhaps 2 weeks. Pius set a course south toward Baffin Bay and the settlements of Greenland. It was their only hope. Arnaluk guided them through the ice, reading the leads with the skill of a lifetime. Tulugak climbed to the crow's nest despite his weakness, calling out safe passages. They made agonizingly slow progress. Some days the wind died entirely and they drifted. Other days the ice closed around them again and they had to wait hours or days for it to open. Men collapsed at their stations and had to be carried below. Dr. Hartmann was in constant motion, doing what little he could with no medicines and almost no supplies. On August 23rd, young Dieter Schultz, the sailor who had believed something lived in the ice, threw himself overboard during the night watch. They didn't discover he was gone until morning. There was no way to search for him in the broken ice. Chaplain Dietrich said prayers for his soul. On August 28th, they spotted another ship. She was a British whaler, the Catherine, working the edges of the ice field. When her crew saw the Resolute limping toward them, they launched boats immediately. The British captain, a weathered man named James Crawford,